Hi everyone, I'm Joanna Penn from the creativepenn.com and today I'm here with Jessica Abel. Hi Jessica.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you on the show. Just a little introduction. Jessica is an author, cartoonist, and creative teacher. Her books include the award-winning graphic novel La Perdida, Mastering Comics, as well as Out on the Wire about the storytelling techniques of the best audio producers in the world, including Ira Glass. Her latest book is Growing Gills, How to Find Creative Focus When You're Drowning in Your Daily Life, which I know many listeners will care a lot about. So Jessica, why don't you start by telling us a bit more about your creative journey and how you got into illustration, comic books, and became a writer?
Well, it goes way back, as it does for most authors. I started making comics when I was in college, I guess, as a sort of, I was in a club where we made an anthology together. And, I never studied art formally. I was in a literature program. And so learned a lot about the language part of it, but not as much about the art part of it, and kind of had to make that up for myself. This is in the early 90s, or yeah, late 80s, early 90s, where pre-internet, there was a really robust self-publishing scene for cartoonists doing kind of alternative adult comics, not superheroes, not any of that other kind of stuff. The kind of stuff I was doing was really quotidian stories about like young people kind of going about their lives, facing the kind of daily problems they have, and that sort of thing. And it's not a mainstream, has never been a mainstream thing to be in comics, meaning the top selling kind of thing. And so I and other people sort of in my positions were doing what we call mini comics, which doesn't necessarily mean small. It just means that they're sort of they're self-published but by hand, like photocopied and stapled and like maybe rubber stamped, and you do stuff to them. So I did a series of mini comics, which were not very small. They were actually like 8.5 by 11, over a series of sort of the early 90s. And my omnibus title was Art Babe. And it was there's a collection of short stories on different topics. It wasn't sort of one ongoing story, but each one was hand sewn. Like the bindings were hand sewn, and they had prints on the cover that I would hand print with, like in one case with potatoes or with like rubber stamps. It was very arty kind of stuff, right? And in 1995, I won a grant called the Xeric Grant, which no longer exists, but it was a very important kind of launching pad for a lot of alternative cartoonists throughout the 90s and the 2000s. I was in the second cohort of that group. And that's a self-publishing grant. It's specifically to support self-publishing. And it was founded by Peter Laird, who's one of the two people who created the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which is a self-published book.
Oh, there we go. Didn't know
yeah,
that.
They're a huge, huge success story of independent publishing in comics, which has a kind of longer and more, we haven't had to battle for respect in the same way that I think people in the print world have. It's a very different feeling. It's like, yay, comics, let's all do it, instead of you aren't real. You know what I mean? There'd been a bit of that, but because we were coming in with like an entirely new way of making comics and new way of thinking about stories, there was no place for us in the mainstream comics world. And so what else are you going to do, right? So Peter Laird started the Xeric Grant in order to support specifically self-publishing. So it's not a grant that supported creation. It's a support that actually paid your printer bills, paid for distribution, paid for marketing. You would put in a business plan essentially for your book as part of your grant application. And I won that grant in 95. And so I put out my first professionally printed self-published issue in 96. So that was Art Babe Volume 1, Number 5. And when I had that in hand, that's what got me access to a publisher called Fantagraphics, which is small, still exists, great publisher, one of the top sort of art publishers of comics. And they published all my heroes, all the people I looked up to, and they offered me a book. So I started publishing with them individual issues. Those individual issues then led to a book deal with Pantheon for my, not for Art Babe stuff, but for a second book, which is a graphic novel, meaning a complete story, not a bunch of short stories, called La Perdida. And that came out, the complete version of that came out in 2006. And then I've done a bunch of other comics with other publishers. So I've worked with actually a bunch of different publishers. I was also the what was the word for it? Series editor for the Best American Comics for 6 years with my husband, Matt Madden. And so we were the people who collected all the material and gathered it for the guest editor each year. And I've just been involved with sort of traditional publishing really deeply for, over 10 years now. And so but I was getting really burned out on it. I was feeling really like my last book, Out on the Wire, I had great support for it. Love my editor. She was amazing. And she made the book what it was. And like having that editorial feedback is rare in comics because of the work process. Because often what shows up on the editor's desk is like much closer to a finished product than the manuscript is. And so we worked out a system by which she could actually get in earlier and make it better. And so that I did that, but she left before the book came out, which has happened on every single book I've done, where like the editor who bought the book changes jobs before the book comes out, which is just like, it's always it's just this moment of like, oh my God, really again? I can't believe it. And, something wrong with me? Is it me? I don't know.
It happens a lot, actually. That seems to happen to so many authors. Yeah.
All the time. Yeah. Because people change jobs all the time in the industry. And it's not, it's not our fault, but it happens. And that means that the person who loves your book and who bought your book because they love it and because they want to stand behind it and they want to really, be the hero for it, they move and then you're just in somebody else's pile. And that happens, and my new editor was great. She was fine, but she didn't have that whole history with me. And then I had, really good PR and marketing support. And still, I felt like it didn't make the impact it needed to make. It's growing slowly. I mean, it's a book with a lot of sort of legacy, a lot of things that it can do in the future. But it still is something I can't affect what happens. I can't go into Amazon and change my categories. Like I can't do anything with it. I can't give it away. I can't, there's like so many things that I want to be able to do with this book. And I just feel like it's not fully mine. And that's just got too frustrating for me. So when I decided to write Growing Gills, and Growing Gills is my first, so I've written 2 textbooks about making comics. And those are books that are in text with lots of illustrations, but they're not just prose books. It's not the same thing exactly. So Growing Gills is my first prose book, actually just prose. And when I decided to do that, and I knew that the self-publishing process would be more direct, like I wouldn't have to deal with the image issue. I would put some images in it, but it's not like a reliant on that. This is my chance. I'm going to try independent. I'm going to try it, use the Amazon platform and, use their print on demand capability for print and just try it. And so I did that put it out in May. And I have no idea how I'm doing because I have no benchmarks at all. But anyway, that's what happened.
Yeah, well, and it's such a great story because it sounds like, you started out in the independent space and you were empowered and doing stuff, and then the sort of traditional publishing gave you a different platform, but that kind of slowly disempowered you because you had no control. And now you're back to being in control again, but it's still quite sort of all over the place, it's a great journey and really interesting. So I have a few questions kind of coming out of that, sort of circling before we come back into the publishing and what's actually in the book. I wanted to ask just about the comic kind of world, because obviously you mentioned there the physical product of hand sewing and doing potato printing and like physical copies, and now you're doing, there's Kindle comics, Amazon bought Cosmicology, a lot of people reading on tablets, so the comic book world itself is less physical, and now you've got this book which I presume is selling more in digital form. So how do you feel as an artist with this sort of change, and how does it feel to have a print on demand, not a beautiful kind of hand-sewn book?
It's complicated. There's some very good things about it and some negatives. I love having artisanal objects. I love having hardcovers that are, beautifully produced and all that other stuff. I have full confidence I will have that again. I don't feel like that's out of my, but I also hate having, this is all my artwork stored over here behind me. If you're watching on video, you can see these boxes. That's just the art. That's not the books. Like storing boxes of books and shipping them out is no one's idea of fun. So I am perfectly happy to, have the POD option, via Amazon. But the thing for me is with a prose book, obviously design is very important. Being able to read something, well and have it flow. And, I worked with a great designer who helped me put a lot of features for the ebook together that are make it really comfortable to read. So that's all important. But you can flow it on any device. You can make the text larger. You can do all the things that make it accessible for more people when you're using prose. When you're doing comics, you can do e-comics, and I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that. But one of the key factors of a print comic, one of the key sort of features of it, rather, I want to say, is the fact of the spread. So when you open a book and you have one page on one side, one page on the other side, when you're reading something visual like comics, you are absorbing the entire page at a time, even though you're reading in detail moment by moment. You're reading in a certain order, but you can see what's going to happen in the future. It's like time traveling, and a prose book, you can't, that's not a factor. It doesn't matter, right? Maybe you could see the, chapter title that's afterwards or something, but other than that, you don't get that look at a glance thing. You can't use color, for example, over a page spread to show a change of mood that gives you a kind of sense of where you are in the story. You can't flip through a prose book like you can a comic and just find a spot by what it looks like. So there are all kinds of things about physical books and comics that make e-publishing more complicated and less attractive. Read a comic that is designed in any kind of interesting way with different panel sizes and shapes. Comixology does a good job of this, but what they do is essentially they have a kind of guided reading path where they zip you around up through the panels, and basically they have cartoonists, some of them former students of mine, who work there and decide what the reading path is for you, right? But if you're a reader, you get to decide on your own. You get to figure that out on your own, and you can kind of look at it all at once. So there are a lot of compromises that go into it. And I feel like the compromises that go in with the prose book are actually, they're way more on the pro side than on the con side, because I've had people complain about type size on my book, for example, on various books of mine, that they're too small to read. And that's not a problem if you have an ebook. You could just make it bigger. You can have it on your phone and it's in your pocket at all times. So if you're, stuck someplace, you have something to read and you can get into it. Those are things that I'm really excited about. And they literally haven't been available to me as a cartoonist. So there's two things going on at the same time.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And, I agree with you. And it's so interesting. And I know a lot of writers who've had small print in their print books because of publishing cost. The publishers made the print size smaller, and then it's been really hard to read. So I really get that kind of issue. But just on the writing side, when you were writing Growing Gills, did you, what lessons did you bring from your comic days, or was it more you were bringing lessons from your teaching work?
I would say it's more the latter. I mean, I think that as a cartoonist, I've had to carefully construct long works and think about the story arc over long periods of time. Or in nonfiction works like Out on the Wire, the sort of essayistic argument that you're making. So I have practice with that. But the visual piece of it is not necessarily something that carries over in this case. The fact that it's comics, the fact that I'm a writer and I've written long books and I have had to do that over and over again definitely helps.
Yeah, definitely. And
the content comes more from teaching and working with students and writing, writing my blog, working on my course, those kinds of things.
So why this book then? Why Growing Gills, and why now? Did you see problems amongst your students or other creatives that led to this? And what are those problems?
Well, it's funny. It actually came out of Out on the Wire in a weird sideways way. So when Out on the Wire came out, I did a podcast version of that book that is a limited series. And it's highly pedagogical in that the end of each episode, there's a challenge to storytellers to create something, to create a step of the story. And you basically, through the season, you create a piece, you make a story. And then intervening episodes were live episodes where we would actually, so we had an online group where people would post stuff, like the answers to their challenges. We would take some of those, and my husband, Matt Madden, and my producer, Benjamin Frisch, and I would get together and live critique and discuss the work that had happened in the group. So it was this very interactive kind of thing. So this group was there, and I was thinking about, what's my next step professionally? What am I going to do next? I'm not ready to plunge into another 3-4 year long project. I'm still working on a book that isn't done yet. Now I still am working on a book then I definitely was still working on a book that isn't done yet. What am I going to do? How am I going to make my life work for the next period of time? Mm-hmm. And so I was thinking about offering, training and teaching on storytelling online. But when I actually surveyed the people in that group and the people who are on my mailing list about like, what are their biggest problems? Like what's going on with them? The number one thing that came back was, I can't work at all. I'm procrastinating all the time. I'm miserable. Nothing is working. I don't know how to do this. I need help. Mm. And I read that, and it took actually a couple reads for me to like click that that's what people were saying. That's really the main thing that was going on. And of course, being able to make the work is a precursor to being able to make the work better, right?
Yeah.
And I thought, you know what? I can help with that. Like, I know a lot about getting huge 10-year long projects, bringing them to fruition, getting them out in the world. Like, I know about that. I can help. And so that's when I started writing. This was in, I want to say late 2015. Yeah, it was like late 2015. I started writing about creative productivity, and basically the crux of it is how to get big, deadline-free creative projects done and out into the world. So I started writing at that point.
Yeah, and you mentioned deadline free there, and that's so important, especially for independent authors, because no one's under contract, and there's almost two extremes. There's the people who are sort of banging them out really fast and burning out, and then there's the people who take 10 years and are still procrastinating. So how do you personally, because for people on video, your art behind you is very organized. Like, my dad's an artist and his stuff is it's definitely a lot more crazy. So how have you organized? Like you said, you've got these tips, and obviously there's a lot in the book, but how do you do your big projects?
I do them the way I teach, which is to try, you have to shift back and forth in what I called altitudes. This idea of looking at the entire project and deciding kind of where you are in the project and what needs to happen next, in large scale. And then you kind of zoom down to small scale, and you're like, what is my next step? What is the next thing I can do? I don't need to think about the whole thing. If I think about the whole thing, I'm going to get distracted, or, get imposter syndrome or whatever it is. And I'm just going to focus on what's right in front of me. That's the simplest possible version of it. I mean, I think that the biggest thing for the two pieces I think I contribute to this whole dialogue about productivity and time management and stuff is this idea of projects that are self-generated and deadline free, that nobody cares that they exist until they exist, right? That you have to bear all of that weight of self-belief in yourself, right? So that's one side of it. And the other side of it is acknowledging the complications of actual life, so that, I have 2 children, and I have a job, and I have a whole bunch of other stuff going on. And I not only have to do what I just described about sort of deciding next steps, blah, blah, blah. I also have to block it into my actual calendar in my real week and get those time slots in. And if I don't, nothing happens.
Yeah, I say that all the time. That's like my number one tip, is block the time in your calendar like you would a dentist appointment or a birthday party, or like anything that you would put in your calendar. You have to put your work in your calendar, your creative work. So that's really cool. So right, I have so many questions. I love that. I love that altitude thing. I think that's really good. The sort of, you have to on one hand be really high up and look at the big picture, and then zoom down into which bit you're in, which is cool. So If people are sort of feeling overwhelmed, when like they're feeling drowned, as you've put it, what are the steps for them to work out how to diarize? Like maybe people are like, well, I can't put time in my diary. I don't even have any time, or I don't even have a diary. So how do people, work out how to get rid of some of the stuff in their way?
Well, I have a bunch of free training about that on my site, and people are welcome to go there. But the short version of it is, there are a lot of different kinds of things that can be in your way. There can be mindset things in your way. There can be literal things. But if we're just talking about the calendar, what's on the calendar? Step one is time tracking. Figure out what you actually are doing, because most people have no idea. They have no clue what they're actually doing. So you plan out what you think you're going to do for a week or even a day. If it's a week's too much, just do a day, then do it the night before. What do you think is going to happen tomorrow? Literally every single thing. When are you commuting? When are you showering? When are you eating? When are you going to watch a TV show? When are you going to bed? When are you waking up? All those things. When are you working? And then what are those sort of those fungible bits? And if it's only for some people who have like 3 jobs and 2 kids and whatever, it's going to be 15 minutes. And for some people who are retired, it could be 12 hours. And, what are you literally doing in your day? And until you know that, you cannot make other decisions.
Good point. Yeah. And what about giving stuff up? Because I find that, most people have to give up something to find that time.
You don't know what that decision is until you know what you're doing. Like if you, yes, you probably need to give something up, but the thing you're giving up may be noodling on Facebook. It may be something that doesn't actually matter to you. Like you want to spend 15 minutes a day checking in with people, but you don't need to spend 90 minutes just like doing whatever and scrolling your feed. Like, what are you doing? And then I talk about this concept of dilemma. Dilemma is, we use it as writers all the time, right? The idea of setting up dilemmas for characters is really powerful, where there's a choice to be made, and there are positives and negatives on both sides of that choice. So some sacrifice is going to be made no matter which choice is the character chooses. So that's really sexy and awesome when you're writing a fiction book. Not all that sexy and awesome when you're talking about your own life, right? It's really scary and hard. But until you identify what those dilemmas specifically are for you, like what are you having to choose, you have no way to make that decision. It's not possible. Like what you do is you fall into your default, and the default is you're doing one of the 2 things, or maybe a third thing that isn't even one of the 2 things, and you don't really know why, and you don't have any control over it.
Yeah, and there was a quote, I can't remember who it's by, how we spend our days is how we spend our lives.
Yeah.
And we think, oh, it's just a day, oh, it's just an hour, it's just 10 minutes on Facebook, whatever. And, again, it disappears. I just removed Facebook from my phone, and I feel liberated. Because it's just, I go to find it and it's not there. I'm like, it's not there. Great. I could read a book.
Yeah. And I think the thing is also that we shouldn't, one of the things that writers tend to do is they get punitive with themselves about, spending time in ways that are not writing. Right. So this is the classic thing. I used to do this all the time, and I can't say I don't do it now. I mean, I mostly don't, but it happens, where when I'm working, I'm thinking about all the things I want to do that are not working when I'm actually doing my creative work. Or if I'm procrastinating, sitting in front of creative work, I'm thinking about I'm saying, oh, I'm not going to do all those things. And when I am doing those things, I'm feeling guilty about not doing the work. Right. So you're never guilt and anxiety free in that situation. And that's like classic. Everybody does it. So if you are going through this, it's normal. Everybody does it. That's why I say when you're time tracking, when you're setting up your system, you schedule your essentials first. So food, hygiene, job, sleep, like put those things in there, taking care of your children, like those things that have to happen, put them in first. But the second thing you put in is recreation and leisure before your creative work. Because if you put in a slot, which is like, I'm going to spend 30 minutes on Facebook, and you put that in your calendar, it might feel kind of like, ooh, that's dangerous. I shouldn't, But like, then you can tell yourself when you're doing your creative work for 45 minutes before that or earlier in the day, like, I'm going to get to go there. Like, it's in the schedule. I have to, it's on my calendar. You know, if you have a problem with like Netflix binging, don't go cold turkey on Netflix. That's not going to work. Cold turkey never works for anything. So, you know, pick a thing that's going to be a reward for you, a time that you've set aside. And you say, this is my time to do this. And this is my time when I'm not going to do this. And now I have both, and I can see that I'm going to get both. So I'm not just this kind of like, I have to, scratchy anxiety.
Yeah. Well, and then there's another problem, which is too many ideas. So some authors struggle with not enough ideas, and other authors, I think once you get used to listening to your idea thing, you're full of ideas. So how do you decide? And one big problem is finishing. Like, a lot of people have finishing issues. They start all these projects when it's fun and then they never finish. So that's another form of procrastination. So how do you recommend sort of choosing which one to finish?
Well, I have a kind of in Growing Gills and on my site as well. There's sort of a framework that I've set up for like some principles on which to choose. So one of the principles, the first one basically, is quick wins. So if you have something that's like 99% done, your dilemma is probably something having to do with imposter syndrome and perfectionism, and you just need to grit your teeth and finish it. Like, do that thing, focus on just that thing and get it done. Whether you publish it or not is another issue. That's another project. It's not the same project, but like, finish the thing. And so if you have a list full of, I talk about this idea, the concept of idea debt, which is there are two aspects to it. And they both have to do with just, you just lying in bed thinking about all the ideas, and they're just kind of like flipping through your head. Right. And, so you have to choose something to work on. And if you keep all of those things in your head at the same time, what you're doing is devoting tiny bits of energy to all of them instead of all of the energy you have available to one. And especially if you live a very full life like we're talking about, you don't have that much energy in a week to devote to this. Never mind time. You don't have as very much life force you can put into this project. And if you're trying to divide it up among 10 things, nothing will ever get finished. You have to pick. So number one is you have to decide, yes, I have to pick. And it doesn't mean you have to throw everything else away. It just means you have to put it away and say, I am definitely not working on that until this thing is done. So quick wins is one way. Another one I have there in that list is follow the money. So follow the money is like, is this going to lead to money? Like, if you're self-publishing and you have a new book that you can put out, and even if it's not going to be a gangbuster right away, it can be part of what's building your future, and so you'll make a little bit of money with it, and maybe it'll build up over time, even if it's not going to be a huge thing. I mean, do it, publish it. Like, what are you waiting for? Like, get it out there, do a thing, And so another one of the things that relates to that is platform building or audience building. So again, if you're an independent publisher, putting out work and having like a body of work is crucial to building your platform. If you have a number of books up on online platforms, people think, oh, this is an author, not just this is a one-off fluke, right? So that's something. So if you have where you can add a book to a series, or you can add a book to your portfolio overall, or whatever it is, that's a way to go. Then there's the final one, which is the really hard one. I might have missed one, but anyway, there's the big one is future building, essentially. Like, is this the project that really represents the person that you want to be, the way that you want to be in the world in the future? If you think 5 years out and you think of what you want your life to look like, is this a thing where you're going to go like, hooray, thank God I did that 5 years ago? Or is it going to be like, wait, the what? Did I do that? I completely forgot. Like, those are different kinds of projects. Main thing is, if you can't decide, literally flip a coin, like spin around and point at something. It doesn't matter. In the end, it doesn't matter. All you need to do is finish something.
Yeah, and as soon as you finish something, it will help you get on to the next thing. I find, like I just put up a pre-order for dark fantasy novel Map of Shadows because I know now when it's going to edit, I know when it will go publish, and now I'm thinking about the next book. I'm like, oh, I just want to get into the next one, so that finishing makes you want to start. So we're almost out of time, but I wanted to circle back to the publishing aspect. So what, you're now. You've chosen to go independent with this book. I guess you didn't really cover. Well, did you? Are you doing it indie just because you were ready to go back? And what have you noticed about the changes in independent publishing since the early comic days?
Well, obviously, the independent publishing I did before is nothing like what this is like. It's just like the apples and oranges, completely different thing. I'm glad I did do that, so I have some sense of like, I guess, what the moving parts are. That there's a printer somewhere, there's a distributor, that there's different roles to play. So that doesn't surprise me. So that's good. Um, Coming back into it, I came back into it basically because I wanted to sort of see the life cycle of the book, essentially, and I wanted to be able to launch it to my own list and my own people and serve those people. I didn't feel like I needed to make a lot of money from this book. That wasn't really the aim. The aim was much more building my audience and kind of going wide with it. Although money's nice, but that's not where I'm at right now with this particular work. And I wanted to have the flexibility to set up promotions and give it away with things, and to it's really a part of it's a piece of an overall body of work that I'm creating. That includes the Creative Focus Workshop, which is the course that it's adapted from and drawn on, and really inspired by, and the blogging work that I've done, and a bunch of other the other pieces. And I kind of took all those pieces and put them reformed them into this book. And so I wanted to have that kind of complete piece there. I needed to have the book in order to have something that people could kind of get into my world in an easy, I won't say quick way because it's long, easy way, inexpensive way, and see what I'm all about. Like, what am I doing? I still intend to make an audiobook, with my background in podcasting and stuff. It's like, it's a no-brainer. I just haven't had the time to do it. So again, like, then I see the opportunity to relaunch it, with an audiobook. And I'm interested from a business point of view in all of those things. I don't know if I'm doing a good job or not as a publisher, frankly. Like, I don't have any benchmarks to know. Like, it seems fine. I'm not probably, I gave away a lot for free. And I had like a 5-day free period at the beginning at the launch, and I gave away a ton of books. And so it's in many, many people's hands, which is great. And if that's my goal, then so far so good. And I can continue to do that. It's gotten really amazing reviews. It's been really good in that sense. So I don't know, jury's out, I guess.
Well, it's interesting because you do so many things in terms of courses and podcasts and teaching and, and all of that. And so you mentioned briefly there that you wrote it from the course, and you've got a free course launching, haven't you?
Yeah, actually, I think the free course, there's an evergreen version that's available all the time, and people can get that whenever they want from my site by downloading the What's Stopping You handout. They'll get invitations to that course. But the free version that's live will be over by the time we air. But the course, the full course, the Creative Focus Workshop, the sort of from the air date of this podcast, that's when the doors are open for registration. And I only open it twice a year. So it's a kind of special opportunity. And so what that is a 4-week long live cohort. So there's recorded material and reading to do, and then there's a live group support and calls and all these kinds of things. Because what I find is that while people get a lot out of Growing Gills, and some people are able to just kind of take that and run with it, because the material's in there, you can get it in Growing Gills. Some people can take that and just like make it work. For most people, the power comes from the cohort. The power comes from other people going through the exact same things you're going through, getting feedback and sort of an ability to customize and individualize what it is that you're doing, specifically, like, am I heading the right way? Is this the right choice for my one goal? Is this, how do I break this down? I don't understand what the next step is. And you can get all that from that cohort and from me in a way that you can't like just from the book. And so it's a pretty special thing. And I've thought a lot about trying to go evergreen with the course and have it be something I could have available all the time. But that's just the magic. Like the magic is in that group. So if you're interested in this, if you're struggling with, getting your books finished and getting them out into the world, now is definitely the time to check that out.
Fantastic. So what is your website, and where can people find you and everything you do online?
Well, the Creative Focus Workshop is at thecreativefocusworkshop.com, and I am at jessicaabel.com, and that's JESSICAABEL.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for your time, Jessica. That was great.
Thank you.